Welcome back. So this time what we're going to look at is slight changes to the skill tree. We're going to make some minor changes. We're going to animate the ocean using a material to make it much more natural looking and actually look like water. We're also going to have underwater sections of islands to help represent the barriers that enemies can't cross. A home island that doesn't change when the player comes back to the game. An item spawn on island prefabs, so it gives a bit more randomization to islands. And you have to forgive me because I'm a little bit sick at the moment, if you can't tell with the voice. Anyway, let's go. Going back to the skill tree, I added a comment to separate the code and make it easier to see. This is just a habit I have when dealing with lots of code. I'll often comment the title, separating the code into segments like this will help with what I do next, which is to complete the survival section of the skill tree with other skills. In my own time, I have repeated the code I created for the single skill off screen, so now we have all the skills for the first section of the tree, as you can see in the inspector. Instead of changing the skill required numbers in the inspector, I decided to simply set them in the code as I won't be changing them and don't need to see them in the inspector. A quick test to see how the skills are working, and immediately there is a problem. When buying one skill, others unlock. This is because once the required amount of resources is greater than what we have, all skills that don't hit the requirements have their buttons disabled, and all skills have the same requirement except for the first two skills, if that makes sense. To fix this, we need another condition in our statement, more specifically a bool called NowUnlocked, which will only change states from false to true when the clicked event on a specific skill is triggered. We want another nested if statement, which will be both similar, but will rely on whether a player has pressed the skills button in the tree. The difference is that if the requirements are greater and NowUnlocked is false, so the button hasn't been clicked, the button on the skill tree should still be active. But if it has been clicked, disable the button. As you can see, I added the NowUnlocked to the buy upgrade, which is triggered by the button click, and I added all the NowUnlocked to the rest of the if statements and trigger functions. As you can see, it's working better, but the buttons can still be pressed even after clicking. This is happening because the requirements are still needing to be met with the NowUnlocked as true. This is a minor problem I will sort out soon, but currently I'm happy with what I have right now, and now moving on to making the ocean more like an ocean. Let's disable the current ocean tile map so that it is not in the way. I imported the ocean texture and created a folder for textures. I'm going to create the ocean using a material instead of a tile map or sprite. I make sure the settings for the texture are correct and create a 3D object quad to attach the material we are going to make. The water is only for visuals and won't affect anything in the game, so it's okay to use a 3D object in a 2D environment. I named the quad background and added the texture to the background object to make a material. Then set the shader to unlit texture and scaled it to a more appropriate size. The tiling had to be changed to match the scaling of the background. Then created a script called scroll background to allow the texture on the material to look like the water is moving. I get a reference to the material and vector 2, which will take in X and Y offset. Then the X and Y velocity integers, which will control the speed and directions the water travels. Finally, the material texture will add the offset, which is determined by our X and Y velocity over time. I play around with the X and Y velocity integers to see what works and feels natural. I change the integer to a float so that I can be more flexible with the velocities. I changed the texture to be more darker and changed the shader to unlit transparent. Let's create the underwater sections of our island, which will help the player know where the enemies cannot cross. They will match the size and shape of the island barriers. It is simply a sprite that is below the water material and is in the scene currently for testing. Once renamed, I copy it and paste the object into the island prefab and again reshape it to the size and shape of the island barrier. I repeat this process for the other islands. I move our border walls and border objects into our level generation object. I bring one of the island prefabs into this scene and delete the spawn points for the islands at the player's starting position. This way the island will be the same island which I will reference in the future as home island. I then place a statue temporarily to remind us that this is the island that will be our home for the player. While renaming some rocks and bushes on the island prefab, I realised it would be much easier to add a random generation to the islands themselves. To do this, I moved spawn point prefabs into the island's prefabs and populated the spawn points to spawn items. I added crabs, seagrass and rocks to the array of objects that spawn on the islands, but it wasn't enough, so I created more prefabs to spawn. Specifically island rocks that are different colour to normal rocks and 2 different types of seashells, all of which have random size scripts on them. I added a collision at the base of the statue to make it more believable that the statue is there. I moved the new prefabs into the spawn points of the island prefabs and copied over the spawn points that were set up on the other island prefab. Now the ocean with moving water and items spawning on different islands, the game is looking a little bit more realistic. However, there's still a lot to do. Sorry if I sound a little less energetic. Hopefully I'll be better next time, but now that it's in the colder season, it's not likely. Me being sick also is the reason why I do a lot less talking as the video goes on, because it's a little bit of a strain on my voice. Next time what we're going to be working on is probably adding a little particle effect behind the player, and we're going to also go back to our skill tree and work on it a little bit more. So look forward to that. See you next time.